It started with three words that no one expected, not from her, not in that room, not in front of 41 men who had built entire lives around the principle that certain things did not happen to them, certain softnesses, certain surrenders, who had crossed deserts and buried brothers and watched the road take everything it wanted, and had kept their faces the way walls keep their faces, steady, unchanged, giving nothing away. She said three words, and the room broke, not one of them, not two, all of them. A woman named Loretta Mae Sims, 74 years old, standing in the Copperhead chapter's meeting room in a town called Bellevue, Louisiana, with her hands folded in front of her and her good blouse on and her white hair set the way it had been set since 1978, said three words to 41 men who had not cried at their fathers' funerals, who had not cried when their marriages ended or their children stopped calling, who had ridden through grief the way they rode through weather, head down, throttle open, through and past. She said three words, and not one of them could hold it. What those words were and what they cost her to say, and what it meant that she chose those 41 men to say them to, that is the whole story. And it starts the way it always starts, with a single ordinary Tuesday that did not know it was anything other than ordinary. The Broken Spoke Diner sat on the south edge of Bellevue, between a closed feed store and a tax preparation office that was open 8 weeks a year, and had the particular waiting quality of a place that exists to serve a specific seasonal urgency and spends the rest of its time being a storefront. The diner had been there since 1977. It had outlasted 3 owners, 2 floods, a kitchen fire in 2004 that had taken the back wall and been rebuilt so well that the new wall looked older than the original, and the slow departure of the kind of highway traffic that had once made a diner on the south edge of a small Louisiana town a viable proposition. What it had not outlasted was its regulars. They came back because the coffee was what it was, and because the booths were worn in the specific way of booths that have held a great many people for a great many years and have become shaped, collectively, to the general form of a human being at rest. The light in the afternoon came through the west-facing windows at an angle that turned the room amber, which was not something anyone had planned, and which nobody mentioned, because people in diners do not mention the light. They simply sit in it. It smelled like chicory coffee, and the particular sweetness of a kitchen that has been frying things since before sunrise. It smelled like Bellevue at the end of a working day. Lace Guidry sat at the counter with his back to the room, which was not his habit. His habit was a booth in the back left corner, which gave him the wall behind him and the door in his sightline, and a clear view of everything in between, which was how a man sat when the habit was old enough to be involuntary. The booth was taken today. A mother with 2 children, one of whom was attempting to dissolve a straw in a glass of sweet tea, an undertaking that Lace had watched with brief professional interest before, deciding the child had found a flaw in straws that no adult had thought to exploit. He had taken the counter without complaint. He was 56 years old. His given name was Lacey, which had been his grandmother's idea and which he had not gone by since the 3rd grade, when the mathematics of the situation had become clear to him. His beard was black going gray at the jaw, and his hands were large and broken-knuckled, and his cut bore the Copperhead chapter president for 9 years, before that sergeant-at-arms, before that a member who showed up early and left late and did the work without being asked. 'Twas how you became sergeant-at-arms in the Copperhead chapter, if you were paying attention. When Lace Guidry walked into the Broken Spoke, the ambient volume of the room dropped a register, which was a thing that happened around him naturally, the way weather drops a register before a front moves through. He was not a man who used this. It simply was. He had ridden from New Orleans that morning, chapter business in the city that had taken 3 days, and resolved itself on Monday evening in the way of things that require patience rather than force, which was most things in Lace's experience. He was heading home to Bellevue. He was stopping because the road from New Orleans to Bellevue without stopping was the kind of thing you did when you were 23 and did not do at 56 without paying for it in the knee. He wanted coffee in 30 minutes where nothing required him. He was carrying something that year that was not chapter business. His son, Daniel, was 31 years old and had been in a federal correctional facility in Oakdale since the previous spring. And the thing that Lace carried was not the fact of it. He had made a separate peace with the fact of it, in the way of a man who does not pretend that consequences stop being consequences because they fall on someone he loves. But what he carried was The last visit, 6 weeks ago, when Daniel had looked at him through the glass and said, "I'm sorry." Dad and Lace had said, "I know," and then neither of them had found anything else to say, and the silence between them had lasted until the guard said time, and they had both nodded at the guard without looking at each other again. He had not been back since. He did not know why. He knew exactly why. He was not going to think about it at the counter of the Broken Spoke Diner on a Tuesday afternoon. He was 4 minutes into the coffee when the woman at the end of the counter set her cup down too hard. If you're new to this channel, welcome. Hit subscribe before we go any further and drop your city in the comments. I want to see where this story reaches because I believe it needs to reach far. I read every single one. Now, back to Lace. Back to the woman at the end of the counter. Because what was about to happen in the next 45 minutes was going to send him to a phone he had been avoiding for 6 weeks, and that is the least of what it was going to do. Her name was Loretta Mae Sims. She was 74 years old, and she had lived in Bellevue her whole life. Born there, raised there, married there in the spring of 1971 to a man named Calvin Sims, who had worked at the parish water department for 33 years, who had been dead for 11, and whose absence she had organized into a shape that could be carried. She was small, 5'2", and had been since she was 15. She wore reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck that she had made herself from a kit her granddaughter had given her at Christmas, which she had put together on the kitchen table on a January evening, with the specific patient attention she brought to everything that required her hands. She kept a small notebook in her purse, spiral-bound, the kind that costs $1.49 at any drugstore, in which she wrote the things she needed to remember: appointments, names of medications, the specific words the doctor used that she wanted to look up later. She wrote in the notebook with a mechanical pencil because pencils could be corrected, and she had learned at 74 that correction was always possible if you had not written in ink. She had been a practical nurse for 31 years at Bellevue Parish Hospital. She had retired not because she wanted to, but because her right hip had decided the question in the way that hips decide things, without consulting anyone, without offering alternatives, simply arriving at a position and holding it. She had fought the decision for 2 years before accepting it, and she had accepted it the way she accepts most things, completely without looking back, and with the specific quiet energy of someone already thinking about what came next. She still volunteered at the hospital on Thursday mornings. She still brought food to the neighbors who were older than her, to the woman down the block who had 3 children under 6, to the man across the street who had come back from somewhere and not fully come back, and who left his porch light on all night, which Loretta had decided was either a habit or a signal, and either way deserved a covered dish twice a week. Calvin had been the kind of man who did not express things directly, which Loretta had understood from the beginning and had chosen to love, not despite but including. He had expressed things through action. The kitchen floor he retiled the summer she mentioned it was cold in the mornings, the specific order in which he always served her coffee before himself, the way he had looked at her when she came downstairs in the blue dress for their anniversary dinner in 2009, which she had not forgotten and did not intend to forget. He had also, in 2006, without telling her, borrowed $43,000 from a man named Roy Duchamp, who was the kind of man who lent money in the specific way of men who lend money, not as charity but as mechanism. Calvin had borrowed it for a reason that was good: his brother's medical bills, which were the kind of bills that arrived faster than the capacity to pay them, and he had paid it back in 7 years of monthly arrangements that Loretta had known about because she managed the accounts, and she was a practical nurse, and numbers did not change their nature because they were inconvenient. Calvin had died before the debt was finished. The remaining balance, $9,400, had transferred, by the mechanism of the original agreement, to Loretta. Roy Duchamp had waited 18 months. He was 61 years old, and he had the kind of face that had once been handsome and had become something else, not through aging, but through the accumulation of specific choices that left specific marks. He wore a white dress shirt in all weather. He had a silver watch that he looked at when he wanted to communicate that another person's time was being spent. He arrived at the Broken Spoke on Tuesday afternoons because he knew Loretta's schedule, the way men who are owed things learn the schedules of the people who owe them. He came through the diner door at 2:47. The chime above it sounded. Lace did not look up. He heard it the way he heard everything, categorized and filed without turning his head. Roy Duchamp walked to the end of the counter. He sat on the stool beside Loretta's. He did not greet her. He looked at the menu on the wall above the register, which he had no intention of ordering from, and then he looked at Loretta. "The 15th is Friday," he said. "I know when the 15th is." Loretta said, "Then you know why I'm here. I told your office I need until the 1st. He looked at the menu again. He looked at the silver watch. "The arrangement doesn't have flexibility built into it." "Calvin built the arrangement," she said. "Calvin's gone." "The arrangement isn't Calvin," he said. He said it the way you say something that is technically true and designed to wound at the same time, which was how Roy Duchamp said most things. Loretta set her coffee cup down. Not hard. She had set it down with a controlled firmness that was its own kind of statement. Her hands were steady. Her face was the face of a woman who had been steadying herself against this specific pressure for 18 months and had developed a composure for it that cost her something every time, but that she was not going to let show. Lace heard the cup. He turned on the stool. He did not look at Roy Duchamp right away. He looked at Loretta first, at the set of her shoulders, at the hands in her lap, at the notebook on the counter beside the coffee that she had not opened but that her right hand was resting on, the mechanical pencil held between two fingers, not writing, just held. The held pencil of a woman who was keeping herself occupied with an object so that her hands did not do what they wanted to do. He looked at Roy Duchamp. He took him in with the particular economy of a man who has been reading rooms for 30 years, the white shirt, the watch, the specific angle at which Roy was sitting that communicated ownership of the interaction. He looked at Loretta again. She had not looked at him. She was looking at the counter. "You all right?" She looked at him, at the cut, at the beard, at the size of him on the adjacent stool. And she did what people almost never did when they looked at Lace Guidry from a distance of 2 feet. She did not look away. "I'm managing," she said. She said it the way she said everything, directly, without inflection, in the voice of a woman who had been asked that question a great many times in her life, and had developed the answer that was true without being more than she intended to give. Roy Duchamp looked at Lace. He made the calculation men like Roy make when they encounter men like Lace, the arithmetic of who has institutional advantage and who has physical presence and which one holds in the situation at hand. He calculated wrong. "This is a private matter," Roy said. "She's sitting in a diner," Lace said. "Nothing's private in a diner. I'm here on business." "What business?" "That's between me and—" "What business?" The second time was not louder than the first. It was something else. It was the sound of a door that had been left open, being gently finally closed. Roy looked at the watch. "Money," he said. "Mrs. Sims owes a debt. To you, to my firm." "9,000, Lace said. It was not a question. He had heard enough of the conversation to know the number. Roy looked at him. 9,400. 6 people were in the Broken Spoke at 2:48 on a Tuesday afternoon. 6 people heard what was said. 6 people found their coffee cups interesting. Not one of them said a word. Roy turned back to Loretta. "Friday," he said. Loretta looked at the notebook, at the mechanical pencil in her hand, and then Roy Duchamp did the specific thing that Lace Guidry had been waiting for him to do, which was the thing that confirmed what the room had already told him. He reached out and moved the notebook 1 inch, maybe 2, sliding it away from her hand with the tip of one finger in the gesture of a man who is demonstrating that her possessions exist in his proximity, and that proximity is a form of authority. It was a small movement. It was the last one he made in that diner. Lace set his coffee down. He exhaled once. He stood. He did not move fast. He never moved fast. He stood to his full height, and the stool behind him shifted on the linoleum, and something in the room realigned itself the way furniture realigns when a large piece is moved. He stepped 1 step in Roy Duchamp's direction and stopped. He looked at the notebook. He looked at Roy. "Pick it up," he said. "Put it back." Roy looked at him. "You have no. Pick it up." 3 seconds of silence. The coffee machine was the only sound in the room. Roy picked up the notebook. He placed it on the counter. Lace did not look at him again. He reached into his cut. He took out his wallet. He counted 9 $100 bills and 4 10s and a 5 onto the counter in a row, the way you count things when you want the count to be witnessed. He set the wallet back. He looked at Roy Duchamp. "That's 9,400, he said. "You'll give her a receipt." Roy stared at the money. He stared at Lace. He looked at the 6 people in the diner who were all looking at him now. which was a thing that had not been happening a moment ago. You can't. The receipt, Lace said. Then you go. Roy Duchamp produced a receipt book from his jacket pocket with the particular defeated precision of a man who had brought it in confidence and was now using it under different terms. He wrote the receipt. He put the money in his jacket. He stood. He left. He did not look at either of them on his way out. The door chimed. The diner went so quiet that the only sound was the ceiling fan. Lace sat back down. He picked up his coffee. He drank it. Nobody in that room saw it coming. Not the waitress. Not the couple in the second booth who had been carefully examining their plates for 4 minutes. Not the old man at the far end of the counter who had been stirring the same cup of coffee since before Roy arrived. Loretta was looking at the counter, at the space where the notebook had been moved and returned. She did not speak for a long time. Then she said, "I can't let you do that. It's done," Lace said. "That's 9,000. "It's done," he said again. The way he said it was not unkind. It was the way you say a thing that is finished and does not require further discussion. Loretta looked at him, at the cut, at the hands, at the man who had laid $940 on a diner counter for a woman he had never spoken to before he said, "You, all right, 20 minutes ago." "Why?" she said. He looked at his coffee. "Calvin paid it for 7 years," he said. "You've been paying it for 18 months. That's enough." She was quiet. "How'd you know about Calvin?" she said. "Heard enough," he said. She looked at the mechanical pencil still in her hand. She set it down on the notebook. "I don't know your name," she said. "Lace," he said. She nodded. She turned back to her coffee. She did not say thank you. She did not explain herself. She sat with it for a moment. The way a person sits with something that has arrived unexpectedly, and that requires some time to become real. Then she said quietly, "He would have liked you." Lace looked at her. "Calvin," she said, "he would have liked you." She was not looking at him when she said it. She was looking at the counter, at the pencil and the notebook, at the small, ordinary objects of a life that had learned to hold itself together with careful handwriting and covered dishes, and the specific discipline of a woman who had been managing without being managed for 11 years and had not asked anyone for help until help arrived on its own. Lace Guidry looked at the wall above the register. He breathed in. He breathed out. He did not look at anyone. What happened next he did not plan. He made a call from the parking lot because the parking lot was where he had gone, and the call was the one that was available to him. He called the chapter's road captain, a man named Felix Arsenault, and said 4 words, "Get the chapter together." Felix asked where. Lace said the meeting room. "Tonight, 8 o'clock." Felix said, "How many do you need?" Lace said all of them. He drove home. He did not tell Felix why. He did not call anyone else. He walked into his house, and he sat at the kitchen table, and he looked at the phone for a while, and then he called the correctional facility in Oakdale and arranged a visit for Saturday. At 8 o'clock, he walked into the Copperhead chapter's meeting room, and 41 men were already there, because when Lace Guidry said all of them, he meant all of them, and the chapter knew what all of them meant. He told the story. He told it in the same order it had happened. The counter, the notebook moved 1 inch, $940 in a row. He told it without comment. He gave the room the facts and let the room decide what the facts meant. He said one more thing. He said, "I told her it was done, but $9,400 is not something I did alone. I'm putting in a quarter of it. I need the rest." The room was quiet. Felix Arsenault said, "What's her name?" "Loretta Sims," Lace said. "She was a practical nurse for 31 years. She volunteers at the hospital on Thursdays. She brings food to her neighbors. Her husband died 11 years ago, and he'd been paying a debt for 7 years before he died, and she'd been paying it for 18 months after, and none of it was ever hers to pay." He stopped. "That's all I know," he said. That the room was still. Felix nodded once. Then he said, "Bring her in." Lace looked at him. "I mean it," Felix said. "Bring her here. Let her see where it's coming from." Lace considered this. He thought about Loretta with the mechanical pencil. He thought about "he would have liked you" said to the counter instead of to him, the way people say things they cannot say directly. He drove to her house on Thursday evening. He knocked. She answered in the housecoat she had changed into after the hospital, which she did not apologize for and which he did not comment on. He told her what the chapter had decided. He told her he would understand if she said no. She was quiet for a moment. "What time?" she said. She came on Saturday at 7. Lace picked her up because the chapter house was across town, and he did not know if she drove at night. She had her good blouse on, and her white hair set, and her purse on her lap, and the notebook in the purse, and she sat in the passenger seat of the truck and watched the road with the specific attention of a woman who does not ride as a passenger often, and who is not going to waste the view. 41 men were in the meeting room when she came in. She had not been in a room with 41 men in a long time. She had not been in a room with 41 men in cuts ever. She stood in the doorway and she looked at the room, and the room looked at her, and nobody said anything for a moment. And then Felix Arsenault pulled out the chair at the head of the table, because the chapter president's chair was where the person who mattered most in the room sat, and tonight that was not Lace, and it was not Felix, and every man in the room understood this without being told. She sat. Felix put the envelope on the table in front of her. He did not open it or explain it. He stepped back. She looked at the envelope. She looked at the room. She opened the envelope. She looked at what was inside. She closed it. She folded her hands on the table. She looked down at them. The room was silent. Not the silence of people waiting. The silence of people who have already arrived somewhere and are simply standing in it. She did not speak for a long time. Then she looked up. Not at one person, at the room. At 41 men who had ridden in rain and cold, who had buried brothers and ridden anyway, who had built their lives around a specific kind of endurance that left no room for certain softnesses. She looked at them the way a woman looks when she has decided to give something she has been holding for a very long time. "He's not alone," she said. 3 words. He's not alone. Not thank you. Not God bless you. Not any of the things the room expects to hear. He's not alone. Because Lace Guidry had told her in the truck on the way over about the visit he had scheduled for Saturday, about Daniel, about the glass between them and the silence and the guard saying time. He had told her because she was the kind of woman that things came out around, the way things come out around people who have learned to be completely quiet and completely present at the same time. He had not planned to tell her. He had not planned anything about this night except to drive her there and drive her home. She had listened to all of it without filling the space with anything, and now she was in the meeting room with 41 men, and she was looking at the room and saying 3 words that were not for her, and not about her, and not about the envelope on the table. He's not alone. She said it for Daniel Guidry, 31 years old, Oakdale behind glass. She said it for every man in that room who had ever been on the other side of a glass and heard silence where a voice should have been. She said it in the specific tone of a practical nurse who had stood in rooms where people were frightened and had learned that the most useful thing you could sometimes do was to say the true thing plainly, without decoration, and let it be enough. It was enough. Felix Arsenault looked at the table. He didn't move. He didn't speak. His eyes were full. He was not the only one. Engines. 41 of them, firing in the parking lot of the Copperhead Chapter House at 9:17 on a Saturday night in Bellevue, Louisiana, because the chapter had decided unanimously and without a formal vote that Loretta Sims was not going home in a truck. She was going home in formation with 4 motorcycles in front of Lace's truck and 4 behind it, and the remaining 33 filling out the line in the specific way the chapter moved when the chapter moved as one thing, which was not often, and was therefore something to notice when it happened. She rode in the passenger seat and watched the motorcycles through the windshield and did not say anything for a while. Then she said, "Calvin would have loved this." Lace said nothing. He drove. When they reached her house on Benson Street, the formation peeled off 2 by 2 and idled down the block, and the night, filled with the sound of engines and the red pulse of tail lights moving slowly through the dark. She watched from the porch until the last one turned the corner. Then she went inside. Then she did something she had not done in 11 years. She went to the kitchen and she made 2 cups of coffee. The second one the way Calvin had always taken his, which was with 1 sugar and no cream, and she set them both on the kitchen table and she sat down. She did not drink the second cup. She just sat with it. Roy Duchamp's firm received a formal complaint to the state licensing board 6 days later, filed by an attorney in Baton Rouge, who had heard the story from a man who had heard it from a woman who worked at the Broken Spoke, and who had been in the diner on Tuesday afternoon, and had found her coffee cup interesting for 4 minutes, and had decided she was done finding things interesting when she should have been speaking. The complaint cited 3 additional clients of similar circumstances. The investigation took 4 months. The firm did not survive it. Lace Guidry drove to Oakdale on Saturday morning. He sat across from his son, and the glass was between them, And Daniel said, "I didn't think you were coming back." And Lace said, "I know." And then, first time in the specific memory of either of them, Lace said the next thing instead of stopping there. He said, "I should have come sooner." Daniel looked at him. "I'm here now," Lace said. They talked for the full hour. On the drive home, Lace pulled the truck over once, on a flat stretch of I-49 outside Ville Platte, for no reason he could have named, and for every reason that existed. He sat there for 4 minutes with the engine running. Then he pulled back onto the highway. The road was long and straight, and the afternoon was going amber, and the truck moved through it without being stopped again. There are men in this world who have built themselves to be waterproof, who have ridden through the worst weather the road can produce and come out the other side and never let it show, who have decided somewhere early that certain things do not happen to them. Loretta May Sims sat at a table in a room full of 41 of those men and said 3 words that found the one gap in the armor that no fist had ever found. "He's not alone." She said it for a man she had never met, in a correctional facility 2 hours away, because she had been a practical nurse for 31 years. And she knew that the most useful thing you could do in a room full of people who were hurting was to say the true thing. Not thank you, not what you expected, the true thing. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who needs to hear that the true thing is sometimes 3 words, and sometimes 3 words is everything. Subscribe so you never miss the next one. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from tonight. And type alone in the comments if you understood why she said what she said, because some rooms have been waiting a long time for someone to say it.